Good evening, you're listening to the Bon Ree Show. Today is Thursday, so we'll have a quick look at the UN and NATO. So we're mainly going to concentrate on the UN, and we had a really interesting chat yesterday with Elvis and his views on the coronavirus and the elites playing a game, a test run for something bigger, possibly. So that's kind of interesting theory. So if you haven't seen that interview where I talked to Elvis, have a look back on that. So today we're going to be talking about what's happening on the Greek border. We've been talking about that for a few days now. And what people didn't realise was when the UN Pact came out, Leo signed it, it was before Christmas. Not this Christmas, before last Christmas, and basically there was practically nothing said. And what it meant was that illegal immigrants would be treated as legal, and anybody to talk about it in a negative way would be seen as criminals. And this is what most governments, including the Irish government, signed up to it. So if you don't know what it is, look at the UN Pact. But it's funny, people don't seem to be realising what's happening. And it's total obvious to me. It's an Islamicization of Europe. You think of the Greek, the countries that the Greek government has detained in Greece so far on this so-called migrant crisis. It's a civil war. It's an absolute, it's Turkey invading Europe. And because I do believe Turkey want an Islamic Europe and they want to be the rulers of it. And that Turkey-EU agreement was a total bullshit. It was just a way of getting money out of the EU. And I think the EU are part of this whole they are definitely part of this UN Pact and forcing migration. It's like forcing rape on people and telling them that they have to put up and shut up because this is the way it has to happen. You have to put up with rape. And that's this forced migration of Islamic countries with violent men. And they are 80 to 90% men, young men, and extremely violent, from ideology that is very anti-female, anti-gay, anti-human rights. It's terrible. And it's very dangerous, very destructive. So the countries that were detained from Greece so far, 64% was from Afghanistan, 19% were from Pakistan, 5% were from Turkey, 4% were from Syria. So you only had 4%. So the majority, 64 from Afghanistan, 4%, 2.6% from Somalia. The rest were Iran, Iraq, Ethiopia, Morocco, Bangladesh, and Egypt, 5.4%. These are all Islamic countries, and they're all Islamic males. They didn't give you the breakdown of it, but 80 to 90% are all men, or young men. But it's like there's very little women and children in this. And all you have to do is see the pictures. They're all young men. And as Greece, the Prime Minister of Greece has said that himself. He says he's a right to control his borders. And he says they are fake refugees. They are not refugees. And he says they are mainly young men who Turkey has sent. And Turkey have given they have been given the transport to over to Greece. So it's completely planned, as the government in Greece has said. The Prime Minister there, he's a new Prime Minister, and he says we have every right to protect our borders. But he actually doesn't realise, I'm pretty sure Greece has signed that UN Pact, so he actually doesn't. Whether he realises that or not is another thing. I'm sure he does if he's a government. So I don't know why he thinks he has, because everybody who signed the UN Pact actually doesn't. You will be criminalised for protecting yourself, your women, or your children. That is what they're going to say. Anyone criticising the UN Pact are going to be seen as a criminal and can be locked up to prison. Into prison. So, this is quite strange that he's saying that, because obviously I'm not sure if Greece, I'll have to look at whether Greece has signed it, but I'm pretty sure they have. So yeah, all he has to do is look at the UN Pact on illegal immigrants will be seen as legitimate migrants, no matter what it is. So this is the Islamic State of Europe, and it's the UN that is pushing this. It's totally the UN that is pushing this. The EU is part of it. It's like the little brother of the UN, but it is the UN that has pushed this onto Turkey and pushing it into the rest of Europe. Well, we're all focused on the coronavirus, and I'm not saying that that's a serious issue. It absolutely is. But it's just interesting how this is barely being talked about. That Europe is being attacked by Turkey with the help of the pact from the UN. So, and you look at NATO. Why are Turkey in NATO? So it's with the help of the UN and NATO. This is obvious to see. You don't need to be rocket science. This is Islamization of Europe by the UN and NATO. And if you look at the UN, actually, majority of the leaders are actually from Islamic countries. You think of who runs human rights in the UN. Have a look at that. It's very interesting. Saudi, where they don't even see women as human. That's who it is. And who's on the women's rights boards? You have Saudi Arabia. You have other Islamic countries that women aren't even allowed to hold their own passports. They're not allowed to drive. They get stoned to death. They have forced marriages. Places like Iran are on the women's rights board. Such a load of rubbish. Human rights. The leader, the main person for human rights is Saudi Arabia. I'm not, like, this is just a joke. So this is who the UN is. And that is why Turkey is allowed in NATO. It's time to wake up, people. It's far beyond a joke now, this situation. And people just still don't realise this is very serious. Like, the UN is an Islamic ran situation, and NATO seems to be taken over as well by Islamics. So it's only a matter of time, Europe. And there's very little we can do when our governments have signed over for money or fear, I'm not sure. But this is coming. Coronavirus is just a way of allowing martial control into the country so that the government can push this way and people cannot talk about it. So we're in very, very scary days. If you haven't seen the UN Pact, or if you don't know what I'm talking about, I've talked about it before. So have a look up in the UN who's running what department. Have a look at the UN who's running the human rights and the so-called women who's on the women's rights panel, and you'll be very surprised. Majority of them are Muslim countries, the same as who's on the human rights, and they totally condemn Israel all the time, but yet not one mention to what happens in Islamic countries, particularly for women and children. Not one mention. So this is the times we're living in. It's all by money. So thank you very much for listening on the Bon Ray Show. Let me talk to you tomorrow on Friday. So have a good evening. And just keep aware, throw that TV out and start reading, start searching things up yourself, start Googling the UN, who runs it, start asking questions. And I'm not saying this coronavirus isn't big, but you've got to believe that we're in such a mess at this stage. It's hard to know what this is really about. And my view is that it is about control. It's about martial law. coming into Europe to take the control. They've already have it. But now it's just obvious. Even England, who voted for Brexit, thinks that they have it. But they voted for they signed, their government, Theresa May signed in the UN Pact. So even though they wanted Brexit and was mainly to control migrants, when the UN Pact has been signed, it's absolutely useless, and Brexit will be useless for this. So I think the coronavirus is masking something much bigger to do with the total takeover of Europe. Thank you. We're living in scary times. Thank you for listening on The Bon Marie Show.